Now, I know a lot of you may not believe this, but growing up, I was kind of called a nerd. I see people laughing, but I don't know why anyone would think I'm a nerd. But honestly, I did really well in school. I got good grades and so forth. And I remember in elementary school, that was the first time when someone actually really said something incredibly mean. That they were just calling me nerd, 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 because I did really well on a test. And I was like, I don't know what you're saying. And he just mocked me and made fun of me for being smart. And he said, you don't know the alphabet because the only letter you know is the letter A. And I was like, okay, that's good. And as I went through school, I constantly got called names for doing well in school. And as I got older, the names got worse. Some got more clever. Some were pretty funny. But one of the things that I actually thank God for are those moments in my life where I was actually made fun of for that. And some people are like, why would you want to be made fun of? Why would you want people to mock you? Why wouldn't you want to be included? Honestly, it's because it opened up my eyes to see other people. There's something about when you go through an experience and sometimes you know how it feels, you can look at people and understand, I understand how you feel. You can see people when they're hurting. You can see people when they're distancing themselves off. You can kind of see them when they are lonely and scared and all they want is someone to walk up to them. I thank God because of those times when I was hurt or mocked or made fun of, because it really did make me a lot more compassionate and understanding and patient with people. I remember as I got older, because I knew how that felt, in high school I made it my practice to really just make it so that if there were new kids that were coming to school, I would be the first one to come and introduce myself. I'm a very shy person by nature, so that's a really hard thing for me to do. But I would go and introduce them and say, would you like to have lunch with me? And you'd be amazed at the response. I didn't know anything about them. I don't know their background. They could have been an axe murderer for all I know. And they're right there, and I would just ask them. And they would just brighten up because they don't know anyone. They're scared. They're nervous. They're constantly thinking, is everyone going to like me? But just doing that. And so I made that my custom. And one of the things about high school is I had some of the most greatest friends out of those new kids. And if you look at our table, it was so odd because we had the weirdest table. We had people who were jocks, we had people who were goths, we had people who skated, we had people who were smart, we had people this and that. We were like the misfit table. It was really interesting. But one of the things that I found about that was, despite all the differences that the world would say, hey, you're different, you shouldn't be getting along with one another, we seemed to make it happen. It's because we had this mutual understanding that we cared for each other and we wanted to be friends with one another. We weren't going to allow people to dictate, yeah, you can't hang out with that person, you can't spend time with that person, or that person's not cool enough. And that's just made a huge impression on me. And when I think about the church, I kind of think about that the same way. I look at us and we're not anything alike. So many of us have different backgrounds, educations, experiences, feelings, temperaments, and so forth. But that's the great thing about Jesus Christ, is that because of Jesus Christ, He unites us and brings us all together. And that way, and when we read through in the New Testament, we see that He really makes us a family. One of the things that I really find interesting and encouraging is that I look around at us and I see that we're all different. And that just shows the vastness of how great our God is. How loving He is, how much He was able to bring the most random people together and mush them all together and it would work. And the only way you can explain that is because of Jesus Christ. And so when I think about my ministry here, when I think about the church here, I have a lot of prayers and hopes. I pray for you guys all the time. And one of my hopes is that we would seriously move over to a first century mindset of saying, you know what? The church said that they were a family, they cared for one another, they shared with one another. And I look at my ministry in the church and I say, that's what the church of Moses Lake needs to be. Where we're caring for one another. One of my hopes is that no one ever has the feeling that they're unwanted or unloved. or unappreciated or disrespected or not cared for. And every time we come to worship service, we are celebrating and worshiping God who brought us together under Christ. And so because of that, we mutually encourage one another, doing what's best for one another, even if it costs us a little bit of ourselves. And so that way, each one of us goes away happy. No one should leave that door feeling unaccepted and unloved. Unless it's false doctrine and sin involved where things have to be disciplined. But other than that, really, acceptance needs to be a core part of the church. And here's the thing. When I look at each and every one of you, I am commanded to accept you. But it goes further than that. Because of the love of Jesus Christ, I want to accept you. And I think of that, if Christ accepted them, then I should accept them as well. And that should always be our mentality. That's the attitude that we say, you know what? I don't pick and choose who comes to Jesus Christ, but if Jesus saved that person's my brother. That person is my sister. And so I thought about this idea of acceptance. I gathered, it's been interesting. Over the last few months, I've had a few different meetings with different preachers in our brotherhood. And one of the questions that got brought up among one of the older preachers was, what are some of the common problems that are facing your congregations today? And one of the other older preachers raised his hand and said, you know what? I'm struggling because our congregation is not accepting one another. They're fighting amongst one another. There's quarreling. There's this idea of not accepting one another. And I thought about that, and this is a bigger congregation that this guy serves at. And I think, you know what? My prayer is that God will bless us, will make more disciples, the church here will grow. But I want us to start creating the mentality and the culture here and now that we accept one another. We biblically accept one another. So as we get bigger and bigger and more people come in, more people with baggage, more people with weird things come in, we say, you know what? Because Christ accepted you, I'm going to accept you as well. So I refuse to have some of the behavior that will hurt you. I refuse to make you going away feeling unloved because of my behavior. And so I thought about this idea of accepting, and I asked myself, how can we biblically accept one another? What does the Bible really teach us? And are there any case studies in the New Testament that show us how we should accept one another? So today I'm going to review a few different things. One of the things that I really want to look at and figure out how we can have that acceptance and that unity that God desires is the understanding that we can be accepting by giving up our own rights. Be accepting by giving up our own rights. Now here's the thing about our culture. Everyone is prideful. Everyone is prideful. And everyone raises their hands and they have this sense of entitlement, saying, you know what, there's a way that I ought to be treated. There's a way that people better treat me or I'm going to throw a fit. Or I'm entitled to this or that. And if anyone steps on that, I'm going to raise my fists. I mean, you even see it in politics. You see it in our culture. You know what? No one really has a problem with anything until it's personal to them. And you notice that a lot. Oh, I don't really care about that. But then once it starts intruding on me, whoa, you better not even do that. I mean, sometimes even in the church, one of the things that I think about is I'm proud to be an American, but sometimes we boast our rights as an American more than our rights to be Christians. And one of the rights that we have as Christians is the right to give up our rights for the sake of those we care about, but those we love. And this is something that I think about, is if we really want to learn to accept one another, we have to understand the principle of sacrifice. Now, how many people like the word sacrifice? Who likes to sacrifice? At this workshop that I spoke at earlier last month, actually, last November, I was listening in to a younger preacher. His name's Derek Allen. He preaches in Ellensburg. He's Kara Carpenter's brother. Anyways, he was teaching about the sacrifice of Christ and the sacrifice we have to make for one another. And one guy raised his hand, and he was kind of harsh on Derek. He was like, we need to stop using the word sacrifice. We need to use oblige or be kind. And I was actually really impressed by Derek.